Hi there, this is Phil with Phil Effects and another tutorial. What this tutorial is going to be about is I'm going to cover some of the more common tools that you use when you do UV editing. I've got a number of tutorials now up on my YouTube channel that cover UV editing. This one with the introduction of Maya 2016, I wanted to cover just some of the more common tools that you do when you do UV editing. It's certainly not going to cover all of them. That's way too many to try and cover in just a half hour or more course. But I'll touch base on the ones that you probably, at least the ones that I use most. And I would assume that that probably would be the ones that you would use too. So we're going to start with is I've got this ray gun here, and while I can't distribute this, if you have access to Modo, this ray gun is one of the free shapes that come with inside Modo, and I just exported an OBJ file and then brought it into Maya. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use the cylinder that's on this as the tool for showing some of the things that some of the common tools. So let's take the other items. We don't need those, and we'll hide those, select those, and we're left with the cylinder here. And I've said this before in some of my other UV classes, but where you want to start with is you want to pick a projection for starting your UVs that's similar to what this shape is. And for this particular shape, and for the reasons of the course, what I wanted to do was do a cylindrical projection around the cylinder part and to do a planar projection on both of the ends. And while you could do a cylindrical around the entire thing, I think for again for the purposes of what I'm trying to show, we're going to do a cylindrical with a planar and combine those two together. So let's start right off, and we'll get into face mode here. And I select one face, select two, and then double click around there. I'll show you a quick tip that you can do when you're selecting things with Maya. So I selected that ring that went around there, and now if I hold shift and hit the greater than arrow on my keyboard, I can expand that selection, and you can see it's expanding that selection out and around. And let's go ahead and do one more maybe. And so there we've expanded that selection so we encompass this much of the cylinder. So now that we've selected the faces that we want to do, one of the next things I always do and tell my students to do is you want to take that selection and you want to save that, because you may want to come back and change how you did your projections, but you always want to create a selection set for the object you're doing UV mapping. So go up to Create, go to Sets, Quick Selection Set, and personally I like to start with an SEL for selection and then just give it a descriptive name. In this case I can say main chamber. And normally I would just say OK. In this case I'm not going to do that, because if you look here in my selection set, in my outliner, I actually already have that. I have a selection main chamber, so I would hit OK if I wanted to do that. In this case I'm just going to hit cancel. And so we have the selection set for that. So now what we want to do is we'll go in and we get our UV editor, and you can see that that is selected. Actually what I want to do is let's do a new projection. So we're going to do a new projection. That's going to be a cylindrical projection, and I'm going to create a new UV set. We'll call this UV set 2. And if you reset this, the default, this is what the default settings are. So we'll create, like I said, we'll create a new UV set, call this UV set 2, and we'll do a project. And we get our projection that comes up. One of the nice things in 2016, you can see it highlights the edges of the seams of our selection set. And so we have our projection tool. And I can go in here and just click on this and drag it and close it. And then I can go in and hit this T-bar. And that gets me my universal manipulator tool. And I want to rotate this, so I hit the circle, so I get rotations. And now we can see we can rotate this, and it's rotating on the x-axis. So let me just take this and go ahead and hit that to 90 degrees. All right. And we want to scale this because we're not encompassing the entire projection there. So let's go ahead and hit the scale tool and stretch this out. And now we have the whole scale, the whole thing selected. One thing I did want to show, because this has happened to me and I'm sure it'll happen to you, is you're working with this universal projection tool, and for some reason or other something happens, and so you go in and you click off, and all of a sudden, oh, it's gone. What happened? Okay, well, you deselected it. How do I get it back? Well, I can go up here and I click on this, and that doesn't get it back, that doesn't get it back. Go back to your channel box, select your object, and go up here to the most recent command. This, in our case, this was a polycylinder projection 4. And I click on that, and your projection will come right back. And so this is our projection. Now notice, though, that the selection is not there. And in fact, if I went to my UV editor, let's see what we got here. Actually, it shows the previous UVs that we created, and now highlighted is that selection. So we haven't lost it because we actually did do a projection. But if I wanted to redo this and do it over the same selection, if I had saved that selection, I would go in and recall up that selection. You go on here to main chamber, you left click, you say select the set members, and then those set members would be selected and this projection would apply to that. It's not doing it because at the moment it's in the middle of a projection. And actually I had projected a little bit more. So we'll just go with what I have projected here. And we'll go in and we'll edit this particular set of UVs. So let me click off here and go into UV mode. So I right clicked my mouse, I'm in UV mode, I select the UV, and I can go in here and I can select all of those, and we want to scale this. So I'll hit the R key and I can scale this down just a little bit. So some of the more common tools, let me show you just a few things right off the bat. You saw I selected this and I used the same tools to move and scale just as I would do inside working on the 3D object. And you can see how things are selected over here. I'll show this so we can show them both. Let me get this out of the way. And so you can see I selected the UVs here, which have selected their corresponding vertices. All right, so then I can go in, and one of the first things we can do is, in the past you had to put a checkerboard pattern or some kind of pattern that you could recognize, so a texture so you could put on your device so you could see how your UV mappings worked. In Maya, they now had that built in. It's very nice, and you just go in here and click on this checkerboard right here, and you immediately see your UVs. Okay, and so we can see our UVs, how they line up and how they map. Note that there isn't anything on the ends because I haven't UV mapped those ends yet. I've only UV mapped that cylinder. And you can see how things work. If I go in here in my UV editor tool, hit the W key so I can move this around. If I move this, note how those UVs are sliding across the surface. This is exactly what UVs do. You are mapping a two-dimensional picture on a 3D surface. And so this is this clearly demonstrates how we take, in this case, I'm essentially sliding the surface around a fixed 2D texture. But the results are the same as if I took the texture and slid it over the UV mapping. It's the same kind of thing. So one of the things we notice right off the bat when I look at this particular mapping that I have picked is I have my seam placed at the top. And you can see this seam because one of the nice things, again, the folks at Autodesk did, is this UV checkerboard is colored. And so I can see this seam right here where we have this dark purple and it goes to this light yellow. And that's the seam where this comes together. That corresponds to these edges over here. If I get out of UV mode and I select an edge, there, you can see that edge. And I selected that edge and that edge. So this is the seam where things bind together. Well, typically when you do UV mapping, you want those seams to be hidden, or as hidden as much as possible. You can't get rid of them. There's just no two ways about it. You can't get rid of them. What you can do is move them. And so a typical trick for moving things is to take something and split it down the middle and put the seam on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go in here and we'll demonstrate one of the next tools that I commonly use, and that's the knife tool. So I'm in edge mode and we go over here, and here's the knife tool, and this is a new tool to 2016. You can see it's highlighted in green. So you click on here and I come right down here, and I'm going to I click with my right mouse button and I drag. And so I'm dragging and I'm splitting those UVs right down there. Let's zoom in and see what we got here. There we go. So that split the UVs. All right. So now I have one section over here and another section over here. Let me get this into drop that tool, get into UV mode, and if I select one UV on the PC, if I hit Control, on the Mac, if I hit Command and I right click and say to shell, it just selects the UVs in that one side. So you can see I have the right side selected, I don't have the left side selected, and you can see that right here. So what we want to do is I want to take these and move these over, and I want this side now to mate with this edge. So I want to essentially sew this side of my UVs together with this side of my UVs. There's a couple ways we can do that. First off, let me just show you the sew tool. So if I hit W, so I can move this, I'll move this over so it's close. One thing, notice when I just overlapped my UVs from my 1,1 plane into my 1-1 plane, or my -1 in U, 1 in V, a texture came up that's green, and you can see that green right here, okay? So what I said was we want to stitch these together, and there's a couple ways, like I said, to do this. One way is to use the sewing tool, which is just below the knife tool. And I'm going to do that with the sewing tool. So we can go in here, and I want you to take note just before I do this with the sew tool though, and the width between, let me get into edge mode so I have like these. The width between this edge and that edge is just about 2 of my boxes, right? So between here and here is just about 2 boxes. Between here and here is just about 2 boxes in width. All right, so we're going to use the sew tool. I go in with the sew tool, and I get this circle. And the circle defines the region that the sew tool is going to try and stretch to grab UVs. Now notice when I get up here, you get the inverted L's on the left and right side. This is actually the same edge over here as it is over there, and it will actually try and stitch those. And so we actually don't want to pick those. We just want these down here, all right? And so I can adjust the size of that region that I'm using, and I hold down the B key just like you're using the brush tool. So I hold down B and I just drag left and right, and I change the size of that region that I affect. And so I can make this very, very big. That probably is not what I want, because you could grab incorrect edges. Hold down the B key and drag and shrink that down. And so now this is something a little bit more reasonable. And so I'm going to go up here, and I'm just going to click and drag, and now I start to stitch things together. All right, so let's zoom this out and drag and stitch this together. And I've done this correctly, yes. Okay, we have everything sewn together. And so now let me drop that tool by clicking my move arrow and zoom in here, and we can see how we've stitched things together. Now this is where I sewed things right together. One thing to make note of is when it did that, it took the edge that was here and the edge that was here, and it pulled them together. It didn't move this edge, and it didn't move this edge. It just took the two that were common. So what I'm left with is the boxes right here, and the box right here is a little bit bigger than this one and this one and this one and this one. Well, what does that do? That actually gives me some distortion. And if you look carefully, you can see that, because right here is where let's see, did it right. Go in edge mode. Okay, right here is where I did that, and it's subtle. It's a little tough to see, but you can see, look at these rectangles right in here. Those rectangles there should be squares actually. They're a little more rectangular, and these are square over here. So we introduced some distortion by just using that sew tool. That's not to say you shouldn't use the sew tool, but just be aware that it doesn't move the entire set of UVs and join them together. What it does do is it just takes those edges and sews them together, and it moves them to do that. That can introduce some distortion. So let's go in here, and I'm going to hit my undo, and let's spread those apart again. And now that we have those spread apart, what I want to do is, let me zoom back out, and for clarity I'm going to go back to UV mode, and let me select AUV, hit Command Control on the PC, go to Shell, hit W, move this back where this used to be, over here. And in fact, I'll space this way over here so it's like this. So it's really far apart, all right? Now what I want to do is I want to take these edges and I want to sew them to these edges. Well, how can I do that? Well, I just need to go in and go in edge mode and select the edges that I want. So I just use a marquee selection and I select those edges. And it's a little tough to see. Let me turn this off. There, you can see that better, all right? So now we can see I selected just these edges along here, all right? And that selected this edge over here. Notice I was pretty sloppy on purpose in how I did my selection. Let me do that again. So I'll come in here and I'm going to go in and just grab all this, and I selected. What I'm interested really in selecting is just this edge. The fact that I grabbed these other edges really doesn't matter, because what I'm going to do is, Maya is smart enough to know when I do this command called move and sew, it's going to move this set of UVs over and it's going to stitch it to the common edge, and the common edge is right here. So as long as I see my edge that I'm connecting to on this side, and that's just a single edge, this is where I'm going to be sewing to. So let's go up, we go to polygons, go down here to move and sew edges, and I click that, and boom. See what it did? It just took it, sewed it together, and note that the spacing inside all of these boxes stayed the same. So I did not introduce distortion by doing that move. So then I can go in here and I can grab all of this, slide this back over here, and kind of center that on there. Let's turn our UV mapping on again. And now we look, lo and behold, and there is no seam on the top. The seam has now been put on the bottom. So I effectively moved that seam by splitting this down the middle, taking the left side, stitching it to the right side, and we put the seam on the bottom instead of having the seam on the top. All right. So let's see, there's a couple other things I want to show in here. So we talked about using the stitch tool, move and sew, the knife tool, putting on the checkerboard. What are some of the other common tools we use? Well, if I went in and I wanted to move just a couple of UVs, actually what I can do, let me go grab one of my other sets. So I have this set, and I have another UV set in here. So let me grab the other UV set and show that. Let me turn this on. And you can map multiple UVs. And if I go in, okay, what I just clicked on is right up here is toggle shaded UV display. And what this does is this shows both overlaps, where you have UVs that are overlapping, or UVs on a particular set here would overlap on themselves. and it also shows how your normals are facing. Note this group here corresponds to this end over here, and this group here corresponds to this end over here. And we've got dark blue here and red over here. Well, what this is telling me is these UVs are flipped. They are essentially, the normals are inverted, all right, the way that a texture is going to map onto here. So what I need to do is I need to flip this. So the quickest way is I put myself back into UV mode, and I just select my UVs here. And I didn't get them all. All right, let me make sure I get them all selected. So I have them all selected. And we go up to polygons and we go to flip. And if I flip that, now we have everything selected correctly. And you can see everything's the same color, and we've taken care of that. Like I said, the other thing it shows is when you have overlaps. Let me grab a couple of UVs here, and I'm purposely going to create an overlap. So if I had some kind of UV mapping and I get overlaps, this is what overlaps look like. And you can see how that color changes. So you see the red, and sometimes you'll even see darker blues. That should be an immediate indicator to you that you have UVs that are overlapping and you have to unfold them. So let's go in and we'll look at our one of the next tools I want to demonstrate, and we'll look at our distortions. So I put some UVs on here, and I'm going to go grab this whole set of guys, and for the purpose of demonstration, let's just move this down. I don't want to see that text on there. And okay, we'll look at this end here. So we're looking at this end, and you can see right off the bat, look at how that's distorted. These are supposed to be rectangles, and we got, I don't know what you'd call that, but it's certainly not a rectangle. And so our texture is distorted, and it's distorted because of the UV mapping. And you can go in and you can try to fix that, all right? So if I went in, let me turn this off just a little bit. You can see what might be the root cause. You can see all of these other radial UVs are going in a radial fashion, and this is going in kind of a starburst fashion. And if I turn this back on, that starburst is probably contributing to this. So what can we do to fix that? Well, one thing we could do is maybe go in and select that UV, hold down my shift key, and I select all of these guys on the inside. And now hit my R key for scale, and I can scale these and push these out. So let's see what that did. Did that fix this? Well, it fixed it a little bit, all right? It got rid of some of the funky edges there. If I pull this back in, that's what it used to look like. So you can see scaling that out fixed it a little bit. I'm probably on the right track, but it's really not fixing it completely. So let me undo that. So how can we fix this so we like it? Well, this gets into some of the built-in tools that you have. And there's tools that do relaxing of UVs, and when done in the right kind of thing, they can actually be extremely helpful. So let me select my UVs, get those selected. Turn off my scale tool. We go in and we can use this optimize command. So let's go in and we'll optimize. And there's two versions of this. There's the new tool called Unfold 3D, and there's a legacy tool, which was the relax tool. If you're used to using Maya previously, I used the relax tool actually quite a bit. So let's go ahead and try the unfold. Let's see what that does for us. So if we apply that, that helped a little bit. Actually, that didn't do too bad of a job at all. What I did is I did 10 iterations with that, and that worked pretty good. That came out fairly clean, and we don't seem to have much, if any, distortion at all on that. So that worked out well. Let's try another way of doing that. I want to show this legacy, so let me hit undo. And we hit legacy relax, and this tool is a relaxation tool, and it has different edge weighting, and it can edge weight uniform, which means it does equal weighting to all of the edges, or it follows world space. So let's look at the difference between these two. If we apply this with uniform, that really didn't do much for us. So let me undo that. And go back here and we'll select all of these again. Optimize with legacy, relax 3D, and go to world space. If we apply that, that wasn't so, oh, I know what happened, excuse me. Undo that. Let me close, undo. This is what happens when you don't reset your units. Okay, so let me go back in. Let me reset the settings on this. Go to legacy. We want to pin the UVs to the border. Now we go to world space and apply that. Boom. There we go. So that actually came up just about as good. I actually think the Unfold 3D did a little bit better. The reason I'm saying that is you can see these rectangles at the end here are a little bit larger, and they tend to get smaller as they go down. All right, let's close that. So if you take a look at that, that's what that looks like. Let me hit undo for that. So we have these selected. Let's go back, hit optimize, go back to the unfold, and I had this set up to 10 on my iterations. And let's apply that. And that actually looks better because these are smaller. And so it's doing a little more even spacing and giving us a little bit better UV mapping. So I think I would, I'd stick with that the best. And that looks like it came out pretty good. If we go in, another one of the new tools that we have in Maya 2016 is we have, actually this isn't new to 2016, I think this is in 2015 also, but we have display UV distortion. So if we display this, I get this color map. And this color map is showing me the distortion that I have in all of my UVs. And in fact, if let me zoom this out, we can see the distortion that I have in all of the UVs that I have here. And the color, what you're looking for is you want the color to be uniform throughout. So this is kind of a rose color. It gets a little bit lighter on this side as opposed to this side. So that's indicative of the fact that there's maybe just a touch of distortion over here. The fact that these are more bluish means that there's more distortion on these than the distortion on these is not equal to what's over here. All right. This says that the size of the rectangles here are going to be different than the size of the rectangles over here because the texture is the same. So the scaling is going to be different on my two ends. Now that may or may not be important to you. If you want those to be uniform, what we have to do is we have to go in and change this. So we can see that we have some gradations going out. We just did an unfold with 3D and that did it about as far as it could. So what I would probably do at this point in time is I'd go in and I'd select all of these UVs, and then I'd go in and hold down the control key, and I would deselect the center, and so I'm deselecting these center UVs with the intent that I'm going to go in now and use my R key and scale, and I'm going to change my scaling. And the intent of the scaling is to try and make things about the same color. And you can see that that is working to a bit here. Let me hold on control again and unselect those. Go through here, unselect that, unselect that. So now we hit R, scale again. And I can change, now I'm getting that lighter ring. See, the lighter ring is going out to the outside. Q again, hit control, select my inner UVs. I'm just deselecting, holding down the control key, So what I'm going to be left with is just that outer ring. Now I scale this again, and I scale that down, and now the outer ring is about the same color. All right, so if we then go in and I go back in and I put my UV mapping on here, we should see that my squares are extremely uniform, and they're about the same size as they are on the end as they are at the edge here. And that appears to be the case. All right, we have some distortion because of pinching, because this thing gets round, and there's just nothing you can do about that. But in terms of a fairly clean map, UV map, this looks actually quite good. And this tool helps you out a lot in looking at your particular UVs and seeing if they're distorted or not distorted. Another couple of quick tools, just real fast, that I actually end up using quite a bit are these right here, which are moving to, takes all of your UVs and it'll move it to left and right or top and bottom. Let me demonstrate that really quick. You wouldn't do this with something that was round, but for the sake of argument and demonstrating the tool, if I went in and I selected these UVs right there, if I hit over here where I say align everything to the maximum U value, boom, you can see that it aligns those that way. If I go over here, then on this side, and align them to the right, it obviously does that. Same kind of thing, obviously, for up, which aligns at top, and then down here, aligns that selection, it would align them to the bottom. So in using this tool, you can grab UVs and you can align things vertically, left, right, top, or bottom. Another couple of quickie tools is you can go in and use these tools for rotating. So I can rotate this left or right, and that's just rotating these UVs around. And these are as the icon shows, so I do a mirror flip. This actually flips things. So if I went in and we showed this, you see what I did? I flipped that, okay? So if I took those UVs and I flip them again, now they're flipped right. I can flip it top and bottom. All right, same kind of thing. Bear in mind, when you use this flip, you are putting the normals on the other side, and so you really don't want to do this. You know, you want everything to be the same color. You want everything to be blue or whatever. So if you're trying to get this to down here, some combination of both using rotations and flips, you can probably do that. Will get you to what you want. So we talked about globally moving things. We talked about using the distortion tool. We talked about using the shaded display so you can see where you got overlaps. Going in, using the optimize tool. The other tool that I use a lot is the unfold tool. The unfold does for when you have things folded up the same as for the optimized. If you look at my next tutorial on UVs where I show some advanced techniques, I use this unfold tool and use it fairly successful in trying to clean up some UVs that we do. The last tool that you might use a fair amount is the layout tool. And once you get a number of UVs that have been placed inside of your 1-1 section, if you go in and you do a layout, if you select all of your UVs and then say layout, it organizes to maximize the placement of all of those UVs within your space. And so the layout tool helps you out with that. Sometimes it puts things a little bit too close. Depending upon how you paint your textures, you may or may not want things that close together. So you might have to go back in and space things out just a little bit. Orientations also may not be exactly the way you want, but in general it does a pretty good job of taking and filling your space in your 1-1, 1U, 1V space and arranging those so it works well. So this has been Phil with Phil Effects. Hopefully this will help you out with all of your rigorous UV mapping, and we'll catch you again later on another tutorial. Thanks a lot.